Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Into the Kinoverse. I'm your host, Pure Kino, and we are doing another Better Call Saul log. This time we're looking at the second episode of Season 1, Mijo. Now, this episode takes place a little bit before the end of the last episode. So we open with Tuco Salamanca, who we saw at the end there, and he's cooking some food. His cooking is obviously meant to look like blood and gore. It's a trick they've used before on Breaking Bad, but it obviously hints at the violence that we know always follows Tuco Salamanca. It also hints at his culinary skill. You'll remember in Breaking Bad, we saw him cooking a burrito for Walt and Jesse and his Uncle Hector. And speaking of his Uncle Hector, Tuco's grandmother, who he's at his grandmother's house, his grandmother is only ever referred to as Abuelita. We don't know her name, but she is the mother of Hector Salamanca and presumably a bunch of other sons who, had Tuco, the twins, Lalo. They're not Hector's sons. He's their uncle. So this Abuelita is the mother of Hector. Anyway, we open up there and then we have the two twins come in. They're shaking them down for money. They're very disrespectful. Tuco kind of calms the situation down because he doesn't want to do anything in front of his grandmother. But once she's out of the room, he basically just knocks them unconscious with a cane. Now, he's trying to clean up after them when Jimmy shows up, knocks on the front door, demands to see them. Tuco brings him in, and Jimmy manages to kind of talk his way out of the situation. He's like, hey, he very quickly deduces what happened. He's very, very sharp when it comes to stuff like this. He knows these guys. He knows what they did. And he's able to defuse the situation. And Tuco's originally going to let them go. However, right when Jimmy ungags them, they start to blame him because they think they're going to die. So they blame Jimmy. And then Tuco obviously turns on him. They take all three out to the desert. Now, I just learned this by looking this up, but apparently where they take these three guys is the same spot where Walt negotiates with Declan in Say My Name. It completely went over my head. This looks like generic desert. I can't see any recognizable landmarks or anything like that, but apparently this is supposed to be the same spot. Either way, though, they take them out there. Jimmy, tries talking his way out of it again. He tells them what he was doing. He tries to lie and say he was an FBI agent, but we're introduced to a new character, Nacho, who sees through it, but he still wants to let Jimmy go because he's like, whacking a lawyer isn't good for business. Now, Ignacio Vargas, his character's name, nicknamed Nacho, was actually referenced in Breaking Bad. So, of course, if you saw the episode Better Call Saul of Season 2 of Breaking Bad, Saul references Nacho. He's like, it wasn't me, it was Ignacio, he did it. At the time, they didn't know what that meant, but they used that as a jumping off point for writing Better Call Saul. It's called retroactive scripting. So they wrote the character of Nacho based on what Jimmy said here in that episode. Anyway, they're going to let Jimmy go. However, they're still planning on killing the twins because they disrespected Abuelita. But Jimmy manages to talk Tuco down. He gets them to focus on fairness, and in the end, Tuco breaks their legs, which, is definitely better than death, but it's still a pretty violent thing. And then Jimmy has a great line after this where the twins are like complaining to him that like, oh, you're the worst lawyer ever. And he's like, I got you down from a death sentence to 6 months probation. I'm the best lawyer ever. So very funny line there. Jimmy gets them to the hospital, and then he goes on a date, I guess, to kind of distract himself, but he starts thinking about what happened. There's like breadsticks that are breaking that remind him of the legs. He goes to the bathroom to puke. So obviously this incident really, traumatized him. He shows up drunk at Chuck's house, just passes out, brings his cell phone in, and Chuck has to grab a pair of tongs and toss him outside. And Chuck sees the emergency room bill from the twins, and he assumes that Jimmy is up to no good again, which, again, let's be fair to Chuck here. He's absolutely right. He knows what Jimmy's about. This is a classic Slip and Jimmy move here. Jimmy tells him oh, it's nothing. And Chuck's like, all right, I guess I'll believe you for now. But we clearly see that he has suspicions, which it's going to be established later that his suspicions of Jimmy really exacerbate his electromagnetism sensitivity. So this is obviously going to be a problem for Chuck too. But after this, Jimmy goes back to the courthouse. He's got to earn a living. He doesn't have any other work. Does a bunch of cases, pleads them out. Obviously not a great, living there. He's just working case to case and struggling to get by. But then he goes back to his office in Mrs. Nguyen's nail salon. And who happens to show up but Nacho? So it turns out that the reason why Nacho helped Jimmy get away is because he saw an opportunity. He realized that Jimmy had brought up Betsy and Craig Kettleman and the $1.6 million they embezzled. Nacho can rob them because they can't go to the cops because they can't admit that they have that illegal money. Jimmy refuses. He doesn't want to do anything bad like this again. He's seen the consequences, but Nacho still leaves him his number, and he tells him, when you realize you're in the game, call me. He can clearly see that Jimmy is like a criminal at heart, and he's not going to be able to live this straight life. So that's where the episode ends. This episode is kind of more of like just a reaction to the first episode and some setup for what's going to happen next episode. Not a whole lot of character development. In fact, there's one random scene of Kim passing by, but she doesn't have any dialogue. So not a whole lot going on in this episode, but we are setting up some stuff that's going to pay off a little bit later. Now it's time for the question of the episode, and I really want you guys to submit questions or comments. I'm going to post a pinned comment on the YouTube video. Hopefully you guys can leave me some comments, because it's the same person as last time, Robo Gamer. He's the only one who responded so far. But he asks, what effect do you think Scarface had on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul in terms of story and perhaps ending of both shows? With 3 actors such as Hector, Don Eladio, and Tuco's mother playing characters in Scarface, it's clear they are fans of the movie. This is a great question. Yes, Abuelita was in Scarface, as was Don Eladio and Hector. Now, if you've heard Vince Gilligan's pitch for the series of Breaking Bad, he said that the idea behind the show was that they were going to turn Mr. Chips into Scarface. Essentially, they were going to turn Walt from this very nice guy to this ruthless drug lord. So Scarface is very much an inspiration behind Breaking Bad. They were trying to get at some of the same themes as Scarface, the underdog kind of rising to the top of this drug empire, but also the destruction that comes with such a thing. Tony Montana essentially destroys himself because of his obsession with power and money and all this kind of stuff. So obviously a huge inspiration behind Breaking Bad, and thus also an inspiration behind Better Call Saul. I don't think Jimmy's story is necessarily like a 1v1 connection to Scarface like Walt's is. It's a little bit more complicated, although we'll see that he will fall into some of the same patterns as Scarface. So obviously an inspiration as is many other gangster stuff like The Sopranos and Godfather and all this other stuff, but Scarface was definitely an inspiration behind the archetype of Breaking Bad and is thus influential in Better Call Saul as well. But that is pretty much the episode. Again, not a whole lot going on here. We'll have more to talk about in future episodes. Thank you guys so much for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode coming soon. Once again, thank you to all the patrons who make these videos possible. Matt Joyce, Uncle Mike, Sam Cedarland, Celeryman, Countess von Zarevich, Admiral, Neil Varma, and Juan Jaramillo.